16 state lawmakers are calling for a study to analyze the pros and cons of a publicly owned electric power utility. These legislators don't just want information on a state-run utility, but also smaller ones that could be run by other municipalities. Let's bring in our panelists on this one. First off, is this something, Martha, we should even consider as a state? Even if you think it's a bad idea, is there any harm in conducting a study like this?
No, there's no harm at all. As a matter of fact, the study could be very beneficial, Gene. I was struck by, I know none of you are old enough to remember Vietnam, but I am. Right now, the argument is over whether the PRC is the right entity to conduct such a study. Kind of the arguing over the shape of the table in the Vietnam.
That's right. I appreciate the analogy. I hope folks did pick up on that because that's pretty brilliant.
But I do think, we need a study. I've been looking at the statistics. The American Public Power Association tells me that homes that are owned public utilities, and by the way, two of our investor-owned utilities, meaning for-profit, have that word public in their name, which is a bit disingenuous. But truly publicly owned utility, the ratepayers are paying on average 12% less for their power than for investor owned, and that's a pretty big chunk. They're also the truly publicly owned are have power outages half as often as the investor owned. So that's something we really should consider. There are over 2,000 entities in the United States that have public utilities. There's only one state where the whole state is public, and that is Nebraska. And they have a considerably lower population than New Mexico, but it's still something to look at. Now, whether the PRC is the correct entity, I don't know, but just my little tiny bit of research that I've done tells me there is going to have to be some money put forward for a study regardless of who does it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Michael, the folks have been very clear on that at the PRC. They don't have the time, the money, the staff, or anything to do this. It's a great idea, but you're going to have to come up.
Not us.
That's right. Exactly right. Interesting, though. I'm curious, how does New Mexico's unique geography, Michael, play into this? Would smaller munis be better off in control given how different the needs of each of our communities are physically? Oh, you're muted there, bud.
It was referenced that that Picaris Pueblo, which is one of the pueblos in a rural northern New Mexico area of the state, went solar, and I just think that that's really, I applaud them and congratulate them for doing that, because oftentimes smaller communities are ignored. And it's a real challenge, and they're actually selling power back to the power group in Taos, and so I just think anything that enhances a community, be it a tribal community, be it any community, the more control over they have of their resources and their ability to support and sustain their own people and the community is a plus. It's not a disadvantage. It really is an advantage, just in the same way that people can source their own food. And there's the long cultural history here in New Mexico of Pueblo people and Hispanic people growing their own food, their own crops, and they're healthier, they're better for you, they're less expensive, and there's really, it restores that connection to the land and the community, and there's cultural value in that. So anything that enhances, I think, a community's control over their own future and whatever they need to sustain that community, I think it's just the best possible way to go.
Tom, when you think about it, there's a lot of forces coming to bear here. It's interesting as I read about it. When you think about it, the advancement of renewables, there's questions about corporate control. Electricity rate hikes are a big deal for people, as Martha pointed out a second ago, that a lot of places are actually following suit. There's, a number of states I'm seeing here, Mass, New Jersey, New York, they're either studied or intending to study this very thing. There's something in the air here, isn't there? People want a little bit more control, it seems to me.
Well, I think people want a little bit more accountability, I think is what the message is that I'm hearing. And accountability is really kind of the reason why I'm not necessarily in favor of having a publicly or a government run electric utility. Exhibit A in my case, so to speak, would be the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. It's a government-run authority that is a utility, rather, that has absolutely no direct accountability to the public that it serves. The utility authority, for example, is made up, its governing board is made up of city councilors, county commissioners, and somebody who's appointed by the mayor. Those people keep rotating off. If I have an issue with my city councilor, state representative, or mayor, I can go ahead and cast a vote against that particular person or for somebody else. But if I have issues with how the Water Utility Authority is going, there is no direct means for me to, really leverage my voice, my vote. And that, I think, is a huge lesson for the legislators who are going to go into this and support potentially a PRC review of electric utilities. So, that's the biggest red flag that I have right now is just that lack of accountability.
That's an interesting point there. Go ahead, Martha.
Bit here. Tom, you're right. Of course, there has to be accountability. The PRC does already regulate co-ops, which are a little bit different from flatly publicly owned.
I should say electric co-ops fully, I should say.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Gene. And there's no reason we couldn't have PRC or another entity to regulate the publicly owned utilities if we had them. It doesn't have to be elected officials or people that rotate off and on and so forth. It can be an entity like the PRC is now.
Martha, does it make a difference to you that starting in very short order, the PRC is going to be an appointed body, not an elected body? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, I think that we need to be very careful whether it's appointed, I think appointed can be very political without question. Elected be equal so. So we need to really take a look at how the entities that we know about nationally, which have already been mentioned, are functioning and what kind of oversight they have.
There's the whole Lew Wallace perspective, right? That anything, that basically, and I'm not going to go through that whole quote, but basically, what works in other states is not necessarily going to work here. And I think that the Water Utility Authority is a great example. I hope that this discussion fixes that accountability structure and provides a good framework for other utilities, whether they be electric, gas, or water.
Interesting point there.
We have to look at comparability, Tom. What states are they huge? California has quite a number of public utilities. California could swallow New Mexico 30 times. So we have to find some comparables and see what is going on there. I think would be part of the study that PRC says they don't have the money to do anyway.
That's right. Hey, thanks again to our line panel as always. This week, really appreciate you guys. Now, be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages.